Welcome to the next installment of Prospero's War Stories, Tales from the Front Line of Procurement. I am Matthew Searing, and I'm here today with my business partner, Don Searing, CEO of Prospero. So far, Don, we've covered project failures, costs being no object, complicated RFPs. Today, we're going to discuss buyer getting bad advice from a vendor selector. So, what experience have you had in that?
Yeah, so the one story I'm thinking about really is wasn't disastrous, I think, as some of the other things that we've relayed here. I think this was a few years back. I've got a pretty large regional kind of customer for us, and we were contacted by this vendor selection group saying that they were, looking for people who can respond to this RFP. They had already kind of run an RFP, but not really gotten a good response.
Mhm.
But like, we're interested in what we were doing because what we were doing sounded like a lot of what was being asked for in the RFP, and they had included us, I guess. And so we went through the process. We talked with these guys, and we got the RFP, and we looked at it, and in our industry there are some very strong boundaries between certain kinds of systems. So there are people that take payments, there are people who process the bills. Sometimes those are together, but then there are people who handle enrollments, there are people who handle claims. There's a lot of separate kind of areas in healthcare and health insurance. And um, when we looked at their RFP, the reason that they hadn't gotten any responses, and from what we could tell, was that what they were asking for was actually pieces of 3 or 4 different systems. And
Okay.
that was problematic because they weren't going to find a single vendor that had all of those pieces. And that was one of the other criteria they put in there. We only want to work with a single vendor. Well, not surprisingly, they got no responses. And, so we got involved in that process, and we said, we can respond to this, but we're going to need to bring in people we've worked with before. So a partner in some of these areas that we don't have functionality in our product, and that we would guarantee we would be the main partner. And then everyone else would subcontract to us. And that way there'd still be just one person that they were dealing with, or one company that they were dealing with, and we would manage the complexity. And so we would make sure our systems all work together. So we spent a while kind of meeting with these different partners, assembling the solution to kind of go pitch it. And we moved forward. There was a couple other, once they opened the consortium, there were other people open to consortiums. There were other people that then came in as well. So we had an RFP process. We made the finalists. We went through that process. We brought our partners. So our partners, like, I think we had 2 or 3 different partners. They each sent a person. We sent our team, and we met up with the client. We pitched the whole thing and explained how all of the pieces would work together. And then the client went quiet, and it's not horribly unusual, but it's not never a good sign.
Yeah.
And we kept getting, we weren't necessarily talking to the client. We were talking to this vendor selection team that would come back to us and say, hey, they really liked what you guys pitched. And, but do you have to work with this partner? And we're like, well, do they have a partner in mind? We can reassemble the bid with a
Mhm.
different partner if they didn't want to
Yeah.
do this. And they started doing that with each of the different partners. Well, we didn't like your one partner. Can you use this partner? Oh, wait, maybe your partner's okay. And so they kind of got very wishy-washy. And in the end, what happened was the client had just gotten tired of going through all of this. And they basically said they needed to step back and reassess how they were doing this. And they were probably going to put out RFPs for each of the pieces going forward. But so in the end, they did put the RFPs back out. They did select the vendors, as far as I know. We did not make the finalists there, but we made the finalists, but we didn't make we were not the selected vendor in the
Okay.
end. But out of this whole process, what should have been a fairly simple project, of this is what's there. If they had actually engaged with somebody who knew what the business looked like, was really an expert in that space. And that's where I get frustrated, because we see a lot of people who are broad. We do vendor selection, and they'll do vendor selection for anybody. Or we've done a vendor selection in a healthcare before.
Mhm.
We know this space, but each space is kind of specific, and you have to do your homework. And it was obvious that this vendor selection group had not done their homework at all, and didn't have a really good sense for what these were, because they let the client ask for something that was impossible.
That was multiple parts.
Yeah, and then said, but we're not going to allow multiple part solutions. And so they went through this whole process, what should have been a simple month-long, 2-month-long RFP process, dragged on because they went through the initial RFP, found no one, came to us, worked with us for a month, kind of came out with another, RFP solution, another RFP process, and we pitched, and in the end, it ended up being like a year-long process for something that didn't need to be a year-long process. And the client got tired of it in the middle of it, right? I mean, they just got so worn out, because like, we just wanted a solution, right? We told you what our needs were. Why can nobody just do this? And again, it was to some degree, it was unfair to us as the vendors, because we'd come in and that was the attitude we were facing, which was why can't you guys just do all of this for us? And it's like, well, it's not our fault. This is the way that these things are set up. There are people that specifically do this part. There's people that specifically do this part, and we definitely do partner. But you guys didn't want that.
Yeah. So they wished for a product that wasn't there in the market yet. It was multiple pieces. It just wasn't done by one person.
That's right. And then even when we kind of pitched it that way, then they weren't sure that we were bringing the right partner, or they saw one partner from one group that they liked and another partner from another group. And so then they started saying, well, why are we doing this all as groups? Why don't we just do each piece?
Yeah.
And that became again, it's not a failure, but it certainly is an expensive waste of time, because they got bad advice at the beginning. They went to somebody that said that they were an expert in the space. They looked at what was there and were told something wrong. And that wrong assumption at the very beginning dragged this out into almost a year-long project. And so, and that's not even including how long it then took to turn on the software. Right. So, I mean, it could have been 18 months to 2 years before they had the solution in place that they wanted. And it could have been something that was a 6-month project if they had asked the right questions at the beginning. And again, it's the process. People got tired, people get frustrated, and the process just doesn't get there. So, by the time that you're a year in, are you choosing the best solutions, or are you just settling to get through? Right. Just get it going, because we asked for this budget a year ago and we still haven't made a decision, right? So along the way, people get frustrated. People feel like they're not getting what they want. And again, when they meet with the vendors, they're already, on the attack, because they're mad because they were told that this thing exists and it doesn't. And you never want to be in that position, really, as a vendor, trying to educate the vendor selection company and the client that what they're asking for isn't a thing, and it's not going to be a thing. Nobody's putting all these pieces together, because there are 4 or 5 competitors doing each piece, right? So, but there's nobody putting it all together. And you say, well, why is that? Well, because most of the other clients of this type are doing things in pieces. So we found that as you build a solution, the more comprehensive your solution is, the less likely it is you'll get selected for something, because you won't quite fit. And you'll be like, well, I have to, you guys have these 5 other systems, and I'll have to turn off these components. So I'm going to have to customize my solution to turn off these what I consider basic functions to fit in. So it makes a lot more sense to say, what is this architecture? What is this thing that people are looking for, and build a solution that meets that need. And then somebody else does it for the other part. And then again, it makes sense to be partners, but if you build the monolithic solution, it's more trouble than it's worth. So people tend to stay in their lanes, and a lot of the other people in the space know this. And again, a lot of vendor selectors know it, and all the vendors know it. And if you had said, well, we want function A, B, and C, go out and search for vendors in function A, and then ask them, do you do B and C? why don't you do B and C? And that part was missed, right? So they went ahead full speed into an RFP for A, B, and C with one vendor, and then we're really, really frustrated. And that's where I think, again, as we start talking about what's inside of the Pressburo platform, the idea there of having those architectures, those reference architectures, those reference systems, tying the requirements and the descriptions of those systems to those reference architectures, that this, a typical health insurer has these types of systems that they are going to purchase. And these systems tend to work together. These systems, these are the boundaries, and this is what system B does, and this is what system A does. And then you can start asking those questions. So, if you were to go in to the Pressburo system and say, okay, I want a solution for A, B, and C, you would see that, okay, I can't pull a template for A, B, and C together. I can pull an A and a B and a C template. Oh, these must be separate systems.
Yeah.
And that's where, by really working with somebody who's focused in on the market segment, who has experts in that area that can tell you that these are the way the systems tend to work. You've got a system that processes claims. That's different than the system that issues the bills. And that's different than the system that manages, who the providers in your network are. Those are different systems. And there are vendors that provide those services with different requirements and different, options and features, but they're separate. You're not going to find all these pieces together in one package. And that's fine, but somebody should tell you that to start with, because if your expectations were managed appropriately to start with, that whole process would have went much quicker, would have went much smoother, and the client wouldn't have gotten as frustrated because they had been told, expect this awesome solution that just doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Additionally, I think, one of the other areas that we're looking at as in our roadmap is, okay, let's say you do want something that's a feature that doesn't exist in system A today, or some sort of combination, and you feel like there's a part of the marketplace or there's a set of features that aren't there. The opportunity to put that information out there, to start to say, hey, we're looking for something that has this additional feature, why isn't it in the marketplace? So having someone that's helping run this marketplace who can answer those questions, the people who are putting together the templates, they work for Pressburo. They're not vendors, right? So those are trusted advisors you can ask those questions of, who can then reach out to the vendors and say, hey, this is actually an area that you might want to look at investing in, because it's come up a number of times, or a number of people have asked for it. So kind of creating those opportunities for vendors to put those unmet needs out there, connecting those with for the buyers to do that, connecting those with the vendors and saying, hey, these are the kind of things that are out there that are unmet needs. And this could be something that would make sense for you to invest in, right?
Yeah.
So if you're trying to figure out what I need to add to my product to be more successful, we're your partner as well that can tell you a lot of that. We are looking at the RFPs. We're looking at the RFPs you've won. We're looking at the RFPs you've lost. We're able to tell you, hey, look, you lost a number of RFPs because you were missing this one critical feature that everyone is asking for now. And that probably is worth an investment for you, because you might have been included in, in the finalist round of X more RFPs. So there's those kinds of things where by helping kind of connect the dots there and acting as that kind of referee that's working with both sides and trying to really create a marketplace where buyers are finding what they need and vendors are building the solutions that are necessary and providing compelling features and pricing, helping kind of lubricate that market is something that can only be beneficial, right? Because you're going to avoid these kind of things. This wasn't, and again, this example wasn't a failure necessarily, but it was an expensive process that didn't need to be that expensive. So what could they have done if they had rolled the product out a year ahead of time, a year and a half quicker? What could they have done with that additional money that was spent trying to run actually like 3 RFP processes in the end instead of the one, right? And frankly, I'm sure they paid quite a bit for the vendor selector. That process, as we've talked about before, that's not that kind of expertise and things that you're buying, that tends to not be cheap, right? So that vendor selector was involved for a long time. I'm sure a lot of money was spent on that. And again, I don't know in the end if the buyer got angry with those people because they were given bad advice. I know that they got angry with the vendors because we didn't have the solutions that the vendor selector said we did. So there's some of those kinds of things where there's a lot of frustration, a lot of just, I say bad blood builds up in that process, and it doesn't suit anybody. And again, with simple research, simple models available, things you can look at that are 100% focused on this market segment with experts in that area that say, these are the kind of systems that do exist. You're getting that expertise from the segment. You're getting easy access to that information inside of the platform. And then they, if they had used the Pressburo platform, they could have said, oh, we recognize we have A, B, and C. We'll split that into 3 RFPs, and we can just say, okay, do the instant RFP, automatically fill out those requirements for A and B and C. They get a list of who they want to work with, and then they can move right forward from there, right? So it's a much faster RFP process. It's much more rooted and grounded in what's actually available. And you're getting much better advice from people who are intimately involved in that market segment. And again, at the end of the day, taking a year or longer process and doing it in a week to a month, so much less cost, so much less time, so much less frustration, and you get to what you want faster, which is I want this system in place to make my business work better.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, educating the buyer on what's out there, educating the vendor on what trends are coming up is definitely important. And that, Prospero platform, and having a platform that can provide you the information to get these RFPs processed quicker. Because a year and a half, even 2 years is unacceptable, especially when a buyer, they want the product, they want it to get in place, and they want to move on with their business. They don't want to keep trying to rehash and figure out. That makes a lot of sense. That that's why the Prospero platform was created.
Yeah, and that's our differentiator, I think, is that there are platforms out there that are designed to help the buyer, and there are platforms that are out there that are designed to help a vendor market better.
Yeah.
There isn't anything out there right now that's designed to bring the buyer and vendor together to have everyone be successful.
Yeah.
Right? The vendor wants to sell something, the buyer wants to buy a solution. So matching those two together so that they find the right partners so they can execute and complete that process, and then get that sale, get that new system in place as quickly as possible with the least amount of pain and frustration. Absolutely the way that, the way that Prospero helps this process move faster. And when we say we've got a better process and a better way to do this kind of procurement, this is what we mean. It's a great example of how this can go, the existing process can go wrong, and how precisely the Prospero system will help fix that process by being really focused on finding the solution and making this a win for the buyer and a win for the vendor.
Yeah, and the Prospero platform has really been built out of the problems we've seen between buyers and vendors, versus it seems like a lot of the platforms are just built like this is how it's done, and this is how it's going to be done. They don't reevaluate. We're coming in from a fresh approach with, we've seen the failures, we've seen these problems, we've seen these platforms not work, and how do we make that better? And that's exactly where we came from with this platform. I mean, and again, different.
And again, with the vendor selection groups too, we've seen so many of these processes just fail. And we've told the story about the disaster that was caused by a vendor selector staying in the middle of that process and really interfering with what was going on in the process. This is an example of vendor selector giving really bad examples and really bad guidance, and in the end having to be educated by the vendors to say, go back to step one, start over and do this so that you're going to find the solutions, because you've told the client to look for the unicorn that doesn't exist. And then they're running around angry that there are no unicorns, and you're like, but there are things with horns and there are things that look like horses, you can get there, but you can't get there in the way that you guys are directing this client. And so it's very frustrating to watch this, especially again from the vendor side, where we're trying to find the right fit, right? We're trying to find the right customer. We've designed our software to work in a specific way, and it works extraordinarily well in its niche that is trying to fit. And it gets very frustrating. And this is one example. It happens a lot. Again, I don't have a lot of fantastic things to say about vendor selection consultants. I've not really run into too many of them that are properly, in my mind, focused on the market segment, that are properly knowledgeable about what's out there. You know, it becomes obvious in some of these things where, you know, a vendor selector comes in and says, we'll do any project. And then step one, open up Google and search for the thing that this client says they want.
Yeah.
You know, and so you fall back into that thing of do you know the magic words? You know, is the thing you're looking for called a private exchange, a membership portal, an enrollment system, marketplace? These are all the same words for the same thing. And so each different vendor calls it something different. So those are the kinds of things where, you know, unless you're in the space, unless you're taking the responsibility to really be knowledgeable and own that model and understand the systems and the way they work, you're coming in cold, and you're just basically saying, I can Google better than the buyer can.
Yeah.
And, you know, or I may have a subscription, you know, to something like Forrester or Gartner, and I can go look up magic quadrants. Now, of course, you got to know not only the magic word in Google, you got to know which quadrant you're trying to fit.
Yeah.
And that's where, like, these folks, I don't know where they went, because if they had gone to Gartner, it's very clear in what Gartner has broken down that what we do is actually labeled it is a function. It has a label, and what our partner does is a function and a label, and those are separate things. So you never would have, if they had actually gone to anywhere where there was any sort of knowledge, they would have discovered that the marketplace isn't broken down that way, right? And you know, and again, so you're paying as a buyer, you're bringing somebody in to advise you, and you know, we always laugh that, you know, you spend a lot of time in the RFP trying to find that right solution, and I get the sense that you didn't spend the same amount of time trying to find the right vendor selection partner, and unfortunately, that's important. You have the right vendor, the right partner, for the solution, as well as for helping you find the solution partner. And so, you know, the question is, who did the RFP for the vendor selection group? You know, did they do an RFP? Did they just, you know, Google vendor selection consultants and, you know, choose the lowest estimate? I don't know how they did it, but they ended up with a group that just doesn't know what they're doing. And again, sometimes you run into people that do know their stuff and do understand the market, but that's very, very rare. I can say in my experience, almost every time that we've interacted with a vendor selection consultant, I have ended up educating that vendor selection consultant about how the systems work, what kind of system. I mean, I had a vendor selection consultant ask me, you know, after we did a presentation, they called me up privately and said, hey, you did a great presentation for our client. Could you spend like an hour or two just again explaining, like, what other systems is that buyer going to need to actually make their business work? And I'm like, why are you asking me? I mean, I can tell you, because again, that's what we're putting together for Prospero, but I don't understand why you're asking a vendor this kind of information. As a vendor consultant and a vendor selection consultant, I would hope you would know that.
Know the market. Yep.
Yeah. And again, it's more often than not that I spend my time educating the vendor consultant. And I've found that actually at this point, if we can get in there first and talk to the vendor consultant, I can help avoid this kind of scenario that I outlined here, by helping educate them ahead of time, saying, hey, let's go through exactly what you're asking before we get in there. You know, if it's early on enough, maybe you can make changes to the RFP to help yourself. And of course, from our standpoint, that's what every vendor wants. You want to get in there before the RFP so that you can help guide it so that it fits your product best compared to a competitor's, right? And that's another area where, unbeknownst to the buyer, they may be talking to a vendor consultant. The vendor consultant may be in bed with the vendor and may be getting information that is kind of directing the whole solution to that kind of one vendor.
Yeah.
As opposed to working with somebody that is really trying to be a referee, trying to manage the process, trying to own the models of the architecture themselves and consider themselves the experts in what goes on in that market segment from a systems architecture standpoint. And that's where, again, our approach differs. We take on that role. We want to be the system architecture expert for that market segment. We want to own our models. We want to use those to inform how we do our RFP response templates and how we do our RFP question templates so that we can help shape those structures and make sure that we've got things correct. And we're listening to the buyers and we're listening to the vendors and we're creating a collective process that works for everyone and is fair for everyone, and isn't necessarily something where you're being, kind of directed behind the scenes down a specific path.
Yeah, excellent. Well, Don, I appreciate your time today. Thanks as always. Tune into our next installment of Prospero War Stories, which we'll have very shortly. I appreciate it, Don.
Thanks, Matt.
Take care.